Afternoon has been leading toward this event, our panel discussion of the history of the department. I'm going to turn things over now to my colleague Monty Johnson, whom, as I've said, is responsible for an extremely rich and interesting blog, which you can get to from the website, The Institutional Memory of the Department. And Monty's going to introduce the panelists and moderate the panel, and after the end of the panel's comments, then we'll open it up for discussion again from the floor. So, Monty Johnson.
Well, thanks very much, Don. Don Rutherford and David Brink both asked me about a year ago to start doing some research into the history of the department. And as an historian of philosophy, I'm very interested in the history of philosophical institutions and my predecessors here and so forth. Only I had no idea how exciting the history was going to be filled with bomb threats and FBI files and all kinds of crazy publications. And I think the term zoo is a very good one that Paul was using earlier. I ended up writing an essay about the history of the department, which has a provisional title, From Historical Materialism to Eliminative Materialism via German Idealism, which sums up and back again, yes. That's right. You can access all of that and all the information on the blog that Don referred to. There's also a link to it, information on the back of your program here. It's got a bibliography of all the journalistic writing about the department from the LA Times and Union Tribune, etc. It has a list of the most significant works, including books and APA presidential addresses that were published by UCSD faculty, past and present. There are links to the Phil Papers pages, which contain electronic links to scholarly articles available on the internet for all the faculty that have been associated with UCSD philosophy. It contains a chronology of significant events in the department, such as hirings and promotions and presidential addresses, awards, that sort of thing. And also over 50 articles on the history of the department, including scans from Marcuse's FBI file, things that I obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request showing how Hoover was having goons writing up reports on one-dimensional man and so forth. And there's quite a bit of interest there. But what we'd really like to do is have other people that have experience with the department contribute to it, give their recollections and thoughts. And already some people have sent me things about that, and I'll be posting those over the next couple of weeks. But now, instead of talking about the history of the department in this kind of academical mode, I want to stop doing that since we have the agents of this very history, some of the most important ones, right here. So I'll just introduce them, and then I'm going to ask the Emeriti to speak for 10 or 15 minutes, and then the professors to speak for about 10 minutes if they have general comments, and then open it up to a general discussion. Now, the first person to ask to speak is Avrum Stroll, who is a founding professor of the department. He was later...
Well, thank you.
You were later promoted to a research professor and then to an emeritus professor. He's the author of at least a dozen books, including 4 introductory textbooks he co-authored with co-founder Richard Popkin, which give great insight into the curriculum of undergraduate philosophy here at UCSD in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, basically. His most recent book, 2009, a lot more recent than my most recent book, entitled Informal Philosophy, specialist in philosophy of language, metaphysics, epistemology, Wittgenstein, but he's got papers on political philosophy, ethics, everything, history of philosophy, everything else you can imagine. So, Avrum.
Thank you, Monty. But let me say at the outset that I am a surviving member of the original department, and so can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jerry. And anyway, I'll speak off the cuff. And so in 1962, I was teaching at the University of British Columbia, and Dick Popkin and I had published a book called Philosophy Made Simple, which was in the 17th printing when I last looked about 20 years ago. But it's had a tremendous influence on people. So many people have, many philosophers have indicated to me that their original idea was stimulated by that book, and they went into philosophy for that reason. Anyway, Dick Popkin and I did 6 or 7 books together. I've forgotten exactly how many, but
yeah, I've counted 6 so far. But those are just textbooks. You also authored some other kinds of books.
well, we did 6 or 7 texts, as Monty said, and but they were successful in general. The last one was Skeptical Philosophy for Everyone, a title we didn't pick, 2002, and that was published by Prometheus Press. Anyway, the original department had 3 people. Dick Popkin was the chair, Jason Saunders and I. Jason Saunders was a classicist, and I was representative of analytic philosophy. Anyway, we worked together, and I can't see any of the text I'm reading.
Yeah, well, that's why you need, that's a good idea, but those things aren't.
The philosophy department in '63, when we got here, consisted of 3 persons. Dick Popkin was the chair, and Jason Saunders was a classicist who had come from Harvey Mudd College, and I represented analytic philosophy. We had been allowed to bring 3 graduate students each, but we were given a year free of teaching undergraduates to design the future graduate program. And so we gave seminars which were laughable at that time. And you can imagine with 3 instructors who had different attitudes toward philosophy and 9 graduate students, that the character of the seminars was very varied. And anyway, so I recall that I gave the first lecture in the humanities, but I don't remember what I talked about. And but someone said that when we first got here, we were greeted by a group of scientists who wondered what the humanists did. To illustrate what we did, somebody suggested that we deal with Marx today, and it turned out that neither Dick nor I nor Jason knew anything about Marx, but I knew somebody who did. That was Stanley Moore, and I'd been his TA at Berkeley. So I called Stanley, who was then teaching at Barnard, and asked him who the most important figure in the field of Marx studies, contemporary Marx studies, was today. He responded by saying that the major figure in that field, now teaching at Brandeis, was Herbert Marcuse. So the participants at the 3-day seminar in Symposium were Moore himself, Marcuse, and Louis Foyer, who had been a communist at Berkeley and had defected from communism and was now right-wing. And he was sort of the foil that Stanley and Marcuse attacked. So anyway, Joseph Tussman was the moderator, who was a philosopher from Berkeley, and a symposium attended by all scientists generated an enthusiasm on campus that was remarkable. To a man, they were very enthusiastic. Keith Bruckner, who was then the dean of, or who had solved the many-body problem, was a mathematical wizard and was very interested in physics. Came up to me and said, I was in the chair, I think, but he said that we have to hire both Marcuse and Moore. So to make a long story short, the participants were Joseph Tussman, and the symposium generated enthusiasm on campus. To a man, they were enthusiastic. As he put it, they are both brilliant, and Bruckner came up to me and said, we have to hire both Marcuse and Moore. They are both brilliant. So we hired both Stanley and Marcuse. Herbert, who differed in their approaches to Marx. Herbert thought that he was Marx incarnate, and spoke from on high as if he were. Moore was a scholar with a flypaper memory about the Marxist text and almost everything that had been set down on paper. To illustrate the point, I attended a late in the session. Moore was giving a paper at the APA, and he had a flypaper memory. The first sentence I heard him give when I arrived late was, there is no place in the first chapter of Capital where the word true occurs. I don't know and never found out what the question was or who had asked it, but heard only Stanley's response. My wife, who was a medievalist, once asked Stanley if he had ever read Augustine. Stanley not only quoted from the Confessions, but in Latin. I felt embarrassed to be around Marcuse, Popkin, Marcuse, and Moore, because all of them were polyglots and I wasn't. Popkin and Marcuse were fluent French speakers, and Herbert, as a native speaker, did not regard German as a foreign language. Moore was adept in German and Russian. When we later added Zeno Wendler, who was a Hungarian, we augmented those who used foreign languages. It's not commonly known that Zeno spoke Dutch and Latin. He served as a priest for 3 years in Holland and lectured in Dutch. And also, since in the Hungarian parliament, issues were debated in Latin, and so we recruited people who were polyglots and knew a lot of languages, but I wasn't. But I recruited Fred Olson from Harvard as a new chair in 1969 or 70, and we hired George Anagnostopoulos around 1969 from Brandeis. Ed Lee was a later appointment, and both George and Ed were classicists, though Ed was also a medievalist. Later